Stop me if you've heard this one before. I went to a fight, and a hockey game broke out. Of all the major US pro sports, other than obviously boxing and MMA, where people are literally being paid specifically to fight each other, hockey is the sport that's the most likely to have a fight break out. That might have something to do with the fact that things that would get you jail time outside of a hockey rink are just 5-minute penalties. Hockey fights are usually one on one affairs, although every once in a while, multiple fights can break out at once. On rare occasions, everyone on the ice can throw down at the same time in what's referred to as a line brawl. There are those rare brawls, though, that go even beyond line brawls. There are games where the teams spend nearly as much time fighting as they actually do playing. One such occurrence was on March 5th, 2004, when the Philadelphia Flyers hosted the Ottawa Senators. The game, referred to as the Philadelphia Flyers Ottawa Senators Brawl, set the current record for penalty minutes in an NHL game. 419 penalty minutes were handed out during the game, including 21 fighting majors. When you consider hockey is basically a 6-on-6 sport, with 5 skaters and a goalie on each team, and is 60 minutes long, not accounting for overtime, the math comes out to 720 total minutes on the ice, split amongst players for both teams. Nearly 420 penalty minutes means that the squads in this contest accumulated more than half the time of an entire NHL game worth of infractions. So, what led these two teams to forget what sport they were playing and go full bar brawl on ice? The animosity between the Flyers and Sens had started in their previous game on February 26, 2024, when Senators forward Martin Havlat drew an intent to injure major penalty for hitting Flyers forward Mark Recchi in the head with his stick. While Havlat did draw a 2-game suspension for the hit, the Flyers very much remembered the incident going into the March 4th game. Although for most of that game, it didn't appear as though the game would turn into a full-on brawl. Only 22 of the eventual 419 penalty minutes had been handed out prior to 18:15 in the third period, and none of the penalties was for fighting. There were a couple of pairs of coincidental roughing penalties, but nothing out of the ordinary. At 1:45 to go in the game, however, all hell broke loose. Flyers forward Donald Brashear and Senators forward Rob Ray, both known for being willing to scrap, had a fight. At this point, this was just a standard hockey fight and not a brawl. The two were separated, and Brashear was being led to the bench by a linesman to head down the tunnel, since his major for fighting wouldn't expire until after the game was over. On the way back to the bench, however, Brashear came across Ottawa defenseman Brian Pothier and just slugged him. And that was the match that lit the powder keg, with the penalty minutes just piling up from there. All 6 players on the ice for both teams paired off, including the goalies. This altercation by itself led to 163 penalty minutes, including 9 fighting majors and 10 game misconducts being handed out. Game misconducts, by rule, result in ejections. Only 7 players received game misconducts, though, as 3 players, Philadelphia's Robert Esch, and I'm going to try not to butcher this name, Branko Radivojevic, and Ottawa's Sean Van Allen, got 2 game misconducts each during this portion of the game. The penalty minute winner for this round had to be Donald Brashear, though. It's kind of fitting since he kicked the whole thing off. He got a minor penalty for roughing, a minor penalty for instigating, 2 separate fighting majors, a 10-minute misconduct, and a game misconduct all before this brawl ended. That's 34 penalty minutes by himself all at the same time, which is more than half a game's worth for one player. The thing is, the chaos didn't end there. Once everyone who got ejected got sent back to the locker room, play resumed. For all of 3 seconds. At the 18:18 mark of the third period, the next pair of fights broke out, as Philly's Matthias Timender and Radovan Somik tangled with Ottawa's Chris Neal and Zdeno Chara. Chara won the penalty minute sweepstakes on this go-round, racking up 27 minutes with an instigator minor, a fighting major, a misconduct, and a game misconduct. The other 3 players involved in these fights only got fighting majors, though, no misconducts. With that mess cleaned up, play again resumed. And again, for all of 3 seconds. At 18:21, the Flyers' Michael Hanzus and the Sens' Mike Fisher had a go. Both would get fighting majors, misconducts, and game misconducts on this one. And if I had to guess, it would probably be because the officials were now getting tired of dealing with this crap at record speed. Once those two were off the ice, Play actually resumed for 24 whole seconds this time, which is 8 times longer than the 2 previous gameplay segments had been. At this point, 4 more players wound up getting ejected after the Flyers' John Leclerc took a holding minor penalty, which kicked off 2 more fights. Leclerc, along with teammate Mark Recchi, faced off against Ottawa's Brian Smolinski and Wayne Redden. All 4 were handed game misconducts, and Leclerc, with the holding minor, amassed 27 penalty minutes to tie for third most on the night. Ottawa's Jason Spezza and Philly's Patrick Sharp concluded the festivities by having a scrap 2 seconds after the last 2 fights, with both being ejected. Spezza somehow got a fighting major, a misconduct, and 2 game misconducts to put his total at 35 penalty minutes, just barely eclipsing Brashear's 34 for the most on the night. When all was said and done, 8 players from each team had been ejected. Hockey teams dress 18 skaters and 2 goalies, so each team starts the game with 20 players. With 16 ejected, that meant 40% of the players dressed for the game got sent to the locker room, including half the goalies. And it all occurred within 32 seconds of official game time. And because hockey is a sport where fighting happens all the time, only one player, Flyers defenseman Danny Markov, received a suspension after the game. And it wasn't even really for the game specifically. He got a 1-game ban for being assessed his 3rd game misconduct of the season. Flyers defenseman Chris Terrian described the game by saying, "It gets to a point where it ends up being more like a WWE event than an actual hockey game." Although, in my opinion, in order to be more like a WWE event, it needs to have at least 1 folding chair. It seems as though the teams got everything out of their system that night, though. The next time the 2 teams met on April 4th, 2004, the game had a less than impressive total of 12 penalty minutes combined, with no majors. And that's the story of the Flyers Senators Brawl, the most penalized game in the history of the NHL. If you enjoyed this look into whether or not hockey, at its most violent, should just be considered a combat sport, please feel free to like, subscribe, or share the video. And if you have a specific infamous sports brawl you want me to take a look at next, feel free to leave a comment with a suggestion. As always, thanks for watching.